It was just two young women posing, until researchers noticed the symbol on her necklace. The photograph arrived at the Smithsonian Archives on a Tuesday morning in March, tucked inside a weathered leather portfolio donated by the estate of a Philadelphia collector. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in post-Civil War American photography, barely glanced at it initially. Victorian-era portraits flooded the archive daily. Stiff poses, formal clothing, faces frozen in sepia tones that revealed little of the lives behind them. But something made her pause. Two young women stood side by side in an outdoor setting, unusual for 1878 when most portraits were taken in controlled studio environments. The woman on the left was white, perhaps 25, wearing a high-necked dove-gray dress with intricate lace at the collar. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her pale eyes stared directly at the camera with an intensity that seemed almost defiant. The woman on the right was black, slightly younger, dressed in a deep burgundy gown that, while modest, suggested careful attention to detail. Her expression was calmer, more measured, but her hand rested protectively on the other woman's arm. Sarah leaned closer to her computer screen, her coffee growing cold beside her. In 1878, during the brutal years of Reconstruction, when Jim Crow laws were tightening their grip across the South, and racial tensions simmered even in northern cities, such a photograph was extraordinary. White women and black women did not typically pose together as equals, certainly not with such evident familiarity. The background showed what appeared to be a garden, slightly out of focus, with the corner of a brick building visible on the right edge. The photographer had been skilled, the lighting was natural but carefully managed, the composition balanced. Someone had paid good money for this portrait. Sarah zoomed in on the image, examining every detail. The women's clothing suggested they came from respectable, if not wealthy, backgrounds. Their posture conveyed neither servitude nor superiority, just two people standing together, comfortable in each other's presence. Then she saw it. Around the neck of the white woman hung a delicate silver chain, and suspended from it was a small pendant. Sarah enhanced the image, sharpening the resolution. The pendant was roughly circular, perhaps an inch in diameter, with what appeared to be markings or symbols etched into its surface. Her breath caught. She had seen something like this before, years ago, in a completely different context. Sarah reached for her phone, her hand suddenly unsteady, and dialed the extension for Dr. Marcus Webb in the African American History Department. Marcus arrived within 20 minutes, his reading glasses pushed up into his graying hair, a half-eaten sandwich still in his hand. He was in his early 60s, a historian who had spent 4 decades studying the Underground Railroad and its lasting impact on American communities. "This better be good, Sarah," he said, but his tone was warm. "I was in the middle of a particularly tedious budget meeting. Look at this." She gestured to her screen. Marcus set down his sandwich and leaned in, studying the photograph. His expression shifted almost immediately from casual interest to focused attention. He said nothing for nearly a minute, his eyes moving across every inch of the image. "When was this taken?" he asked quietly. "The date on the back says September 1878, Philadelphia, based on the photographer's stamp." "May I?" He pointed to her mouse. Sarah stepped aside. Marcus zoomed in on the necklace, his jaw tightening. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through images until he found what he was looking for. He held the phone up beside the monitor. On his screen was a grainy photograph of a brass button taken at an archaeological dig in Delaware. Etched into its surface was a symbol. A simple compass rose with a star at its center, surrounded by tiny dots arranged in a specific pattern. The symbol on the necklace was nearly identical. "Do you know what this is?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded slowly. "I've seen similar markings in research on the Underground Railroad. They were used as identification symbols, weren't they? Ways for conductors and safe house operators to recognize each other." "Not just any conductors." Marcus sat down heavily in Sarah's chair, still staring at the screen. "This particular symbol, the compass rose with 7 stars in this exact configuration, it was used by a very specific group, women who continued the network's work after the Civil War ended." "After?" Sarah frowned. "But the Underground Railroad shut down after abolition." "That's what most people think." Marcus enlarged the image even further, studying the women's faces. But the work didn't end with the Emancipation Proclamation. After the war, thousands of formerly enslaved families were separated, scattered across the country. Children had been sold away from parents, husbands from wives, siblings torn apart. The legal system offered them almost no help in reuniting. So some of the old network reformed quietly to help families find each other again. He pointed to the necklace. And this symbol identified women who ran what they called reunion houses, safe places where separated family members could leave messages, wait for word, and coordinate meetings. It was dangerous work. Many southern states had laws against helping formerly enslaved people move freely, and even in the North, there were plenty who didn't want black families reunifying and gaining strength. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. So these two women were part of something remarkable. Marcus straightened up, his historian's instincts fully engaged now, and possibly very dangerous. I need to find out who they were. The photographer's mark on the back of the photograph read, J. Morrison and Sons, Philadelphia. Sarah spent the next morning in the archive's basement, surrounded by dusty ledgers and city directories from the 1870s. The Morrison studio had been located on Chestnut Street, a respectable address that catered to middle-class clients who could afford professional portraits, but weren't wealthy enough for the most prestigious establishments. The studio's records, miraculously preserved by a descendant who had donated them 5 years earlier, included order logs with client names. Sarah ran her finger down the pages for September 1878, looking for entries that might match. Most were single names or family groupings. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, the Coleman children, Miss Elizabeth Warren. Then she found it, Miss Clara Hodgson and Miss Ruth Freeman, outdoor portrait, special request. Sarah photographed the page and immediately called Marcus, who was working his own angle, searching through Philadelphia church records and Abolitionist Society membership lists from the period. Clara Hodgson and Ruth Freeman, she told him. Does either name mean anything to you? There was a pause as Marcus pulled up his own database. Nothing immediately, but let me cross-reference with census records. She heard keyboard clicks through the phone. Here, Ruth Freeman, born approximately 1856, listed in the 1880 census as a seamstress living on Lombard Street. That was in the 7th Ward, a predominantly black neighborhood. And Clara Hodgson? More typing. This is interesting. Clara Hodgson, born 1853, listed in the 1870 census as living with her parents on Spruce Street. Father was a physician, mother from a Quaker family, comfortable middle-class background. He paused. Sarah, Quakers were heavily involved in abolitionist work before and during the war. Many continued supporting black communities afterward. So we have a Quaker woman and a black seamstress, photographed together in 1878. Sarah felt the pieces beginning to align. Where do we go from here? I'm going to check if either of them left any papers, letters, or diaries. You keep digging into that photographer's records. See if there are any other photos of them, or notes about the session. Someone paid extra for an outdoor portrait, which was unusual. That suggests this photograph was important to them. Sarah returned to the ledgers, this time looking more carefully at the entries surrounding Clara and Ruth's portrait. Most sessions were brief notes, names, number of plates, cost. But next to Clara and Ruth's entry, in different ink, someone had added a small notation. Urgent request, private sitting, full payment received. Someone had wanted this photograph badly enough to pay premium prices and arrange special circumstances. This wasn't just a casual portrait of friends. This was documentation, evidence, a record meant to survive. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the reading room of the Friends Historical Library in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, surrounded by boxes of documents from Philadelphia Quaker meetings in the 1870s. The librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy, who had worked there for 40 years, had been extraordinarily helpful once Marcus explained what he was looking for. The Hodgson family, Dorothy said, pulling out a leather-bound record book. Yes, they were members of the Cherry Street meeting, very active in social reform work. She opened the book carefully, its spine cracking softly. Here, Benjamin Hodgson, physician, and his wife Elizabeth. They had 3 children, Clara, the eldest, and 2 sons. Marcus leaned over the book, reading the faded handwriting. The entries were sparse but telling. Benjamin Hodgson had served on committees for the relief of freedmen and the education of colored children. His wife Elizabeth had been part of a women's group that provided material and moral support to displaced families. Do you have any personal papers from the family? Marcus asked. Letters, diaries, anything like that? Dorothy's expression brightened. Actually, we do have a small collection. Clara Hodgson herself donated some materials in 1923, late in her life. Let me check what we have. She disappeared into the back rooms, leaving Marcus to continue reading through the meeting records. The Hodgsons had been respected but not prominent, solid members of the community who lived their faith through quiet service rather than public declarations. 20 minutes later, Dorothy returned carrying a single archival box. This is everything we have. It's not much. Some correspondence, a few notebooks, some financial records from a charitable society she ran. Marcus opened the box with careful hands. Inside were bundles of letters tied with ribbons, several small leather-bound journals, and loose papers covered with lists and notations. He began with the journals, opening one dated 1877-1879. The entries were brief, almost cryptic in places. Clara had not written a traditional diary, but rather a record of what appeared to be meetings, visits, and activities. March 12, 1877. Received word from Ruth. The Taylor family seeks news of their daughter. Will make inquiries in Richmond. June 3rd of 1877. Success. The girl is found working in a household in Alexandria. Ruth will travel next week. September 8th, 1877. Dangerous news from Baltimore. Houses being watched. Must proceed with greater care. Marcus's pulse quickened. This was exactly what he had hoped to find, evidence of the reunion network's operations, but it was also frustratingly vague. Clara had been careful, even in her private records, not to include details that could endanger anyone if the journal was discovered. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah. "I've got something. Clara Hodgson kept records of their work. It's coded and careful, but it's definitely documenting reunification efforts. She mentions Ruth frequently. They were working together." "That matches what I found," Sarah said excitedly. "I tracked down a descendant of the Morrison photographer. His great-great-grandson still has some of the studio's old plates and correspondence. He's agreed to meet with me tomorrow. Marcus, he says his ancestor kept notes about unusual commissions. This is coming together faster than I expected," Marcus said, carefully photographing pages from Clara's journal. "But we still don't know the most important thing. What happened to them? Did they get caught? Were they arrested?" Dorothy, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "I can answer part of that. Clara Hodgson never married. She lived until 1931, dying at the age of 78. She continued charitable work throughout her life, though the records become less detailed after 1880. "And Ruth Freeman?" Marcus asked. Dorothy shook her head. "I have no records of her after 1878. But that's not unusual. Black women's lives from that era are often poorly documented, especially if they weren't part of formal institutions." Marcus felt a chill. Ruth had vanished from the historical record at exactly the time the photograph was taken. That couldn't be a coincidence. The Morrison family home was a narrow brick row house in South Philadelphia, carefully maintained but showing its age. Thomas Morrison IV, a retired high school teacher in his 70s, welcomed Sarah into a front room crowded with furniture and family photographs spanning generations. "My great-great-grandfather was quite proud of his work," Thomas said, pulling out a large wooden chest from beneath a table. He kept detailed notes about his sessions, especially the ones he considered artistically significant or historically important. He opened the chest to reveal dozens of notebooks, loose papers, and glass plates wrapped in cloth. The chemical smell of old developer solution still lingered faintly. "September 1878, Sarah said, helping him sort through the materials. "Two young women, outdoor portrait." Thomas found the relevant notebook and opened it carefully. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its neatness. "September 14th, 1878. Special commission from Miss Clara Hodgson. Portrait to be taken in the garden of the Freeman residence, Lombard Street. Insisted upon natural light and outdoor setting despite complications. Subject requested that no copies be made for public display. Single print, ordered for private keeping." He looked up at Sarah. "That's unusual. Most clients wanted multiple copies, one for themselves, sometimes ones to send to relatives, or even to submit to newspapers or society pages. Requesting no public copies suggests they wanted to keep this photograph secret." "Did he note anything else?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. Thomas continued reading. "The subjects displayed remarkable composure and dignity. Unusual to photograph a white lady and a colored lady together as equals, but both conducted themselves with grace. Miss Hodgson insisted upon the arrangement. They must be shown as companions, not as mistress and servant. She paid double my usual fee and requested I destroy the negative after printing." Sarah caught her breath. "Did he destroy it?" Thomas smiled slightly. "According to this note, no. He wrote, 'I could not bring myself to destroy such a fine negative. The composition is excellent, and the photograph documents something significant, though I do not know exactly what. Have hidden the plate among my personal collection. Perhaps someday someone will understand its importance.'" He reached into the chest and pulled out a cloth-wrapped package, unfolding it carefully to reveal a glass negative plate. Even in reverse, the image of Clara and Ruth was clear and sharp, two women frozen in time, their connection evident in every detail. "There's more," Thomas said, returning to the notebook. "A week after the photograph was taken, my great-great-grandfather wrote another entry. Miss Hodgson returned today, distraught. Her companion, Miss Freeman, has left Philadelphia suddenly. Miss Hodgson would not explain, but asked if I had kept the negative safe. I assured her I had hidden it well. She looked relieved, but also profoundly sad. She said, 'This photograph may be the only proof that Ruth and I existed together, that our friendship was real.' She paid me an additional sum to keep it secure." Sarah felt her eyes burning. "Ruth disappeared right after the photograph was taken." "It appears so." Thomas handed her the notebook. "You're welcome to scan these pages. I've always wondered what the story was behind this photograph. My great-great-grandfather clearly thought it was important. He kept that negative safe for the rest of his life. And my grandfather kept it after him, and my father after that. Now it's in your hands." Sarah carefully photographed every page of the relevant entries, her mind racing. Clara and Ruth had commissioned this photograph knowing it might be the last time they were together. The portrait wasn't just documentation. It was a farewell. Marcus spent 3 days searching through Philadelphia police records, court documents, and newspaper archives from September and October 1878. The work was painstaking. Most records from black communities during that era were sparse or non-existent, and many newspapers didn't report on events in black neighborhoods unless they involved crime or sensational stories. But on the 4th day, he found something. A brief article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated September 23, 1878, buried on page 7. Negro woman arrested in Delaware. Ruth Freeman, aged approximately 22 of Philadelphia, was detained by authorities in Wilmington yesterday on suspicion of abetting the illegal transport of colored persons across state lines. Freeman was allegedly operating a boarding house that facilitated the movement of freedmen seeking family members in the South, in violation of several statutes. She is being held pending investigation. Local authorities report this is part of a broader effort to suppress organizations that encourage unsettled colored populations to relocate without proper documentation. Marcus read the article 3 times, his chest tightening with each pass. The language was deliberately vague: illegal transport, facilitating movement, but the message was clear. Ruth had been arrested for exactly the work that the necklace symbol represented. He searched for follow-up articles but found nothing. No trial, no sentencing, no further mention of Ruth Freeman. It was as if she had simply disappeared into the system. He called Sarah immediately. "I found what happened to Ruth. She was arrested in Delaware 9 days after the photograph was taken." Arrested for what? Helping freedmen find family members. They called it illegal transport, which was code for continuing Underground Railroad-type activities. Sarah, she probably went to prison, but I can't find any record of a trial or sentencing. "That's not unusual for the time," Sarah said quietly. Black defendants, especially those involved in anything related to the Underground Railroad, were often tried in closed proceedings or simply detained indefinitely. Records were poorly kept or deliberately destroyed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted and frustrated. We need to find out if Clara tried to help her, if they stayed in contact, if Ruth survived. "I'm going back to the Quaker library tomorrow," Sarah said. "Clara's journals. There might be more entries after the photograph was taken. If anyone would have documented Ruth's fate, it would be Clara." That evening, Marcus sat in his office, the photograph of Clara and Ruth displayed on his monitor. He zoomed in on their faces, studying their expressions. Ruth's calm strength, Clara's defiant gaze. They had known the risks. They had taken the photograph anyway, creating a record of their friendship and their work. The necklace gleamed in the light, its symbol clear and unmistakable, a declaration of who they were and what they had done. Marcus thought about the thousands of families Ruth and Clara had helped reunite, the lives they had touched, the dangerous work they had undertaken in the shadows of Reconstruction, and he thought about how close their story had come to being completely forgotten, preserved only by a photographer who kept a negative he should have destroyed, and a donation to an archive that almost went unnoticed. History, Marcus knew, was full of such narrow survivals, stories that existed only because someone, somewhere, had decided they mattered enough to save. Dorothy had pulled out 3 more boxes by the time Sarah arrived at the Friends' Historical Library. "I went through our entire Hodgson collection last night," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "There are more journals and letters. So many letters." Sarah sat down at the reading table, Dorothy beside her, and opened the first journal. This one dated from 1879-1881, picking up where the previous volume had left off. The first entry stopped Sarah's breath. October 1st, 1878. Ruth is imprisoned in Wilmington. The charges are false, but supported by testimony from those who wish to see our work ended. Father has made inquiries through Quaker friends in Delaware. They report the conditions are brutal. Ruth will not recant or name others involved in the network. Her courage shames my own fears. October 15th, 1878. I traveled to Wilmington today, though Father forbade it. They would not allow me to see Ruth. The warden laughed when I identified myself as her friend. He said, "White ladies do not have colored friends, only servants, and if I persisted in this fiction, I might find myself facing questions about my own involvement in illegal activities. I left before he could detain me, but my heart remained in that terrible place." Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Entry after entry documented Clara's increasingly desperate attempts to help Ruth, hiring lawyers who refused to take the case, petitioning judges who dismissed her claims, writing to politicians who never responded. December 3rd, 1878. Ruth has been sentenced to 3 years of hard labor in the Delaware Women's Penitentiary. The trial, if it can be called such, was held without her family's knowledge and with no legal representation. She was not permitted to speak in her own defense. Father says I must accept this and move on. Mother weeps, but says nothing. I feel as though I am watching Ruth drown while standing safely on shore. December 25th, 1878. I did not attend meeting today. I cannot reconcile my faith with this injustice. Ruth sits in prison on Christmas Day for the crime of helping families reunite. If this is justice, then justice itself is a lie. Marcus arrived mid-morning, and Sarah shared what she had found. Together they continued through Clara's journals, watching her grief and anger evolve into something harder and more determined. February 1879. I have found 3 others from the network who are willing to continue the work, more carefully now. We meet in secret and speak only in the coded language Ruth taught me. I wear the necklace she gave me as a reminder that this work does not end simply because one of us has fallen. June 1879. Word from Wilmington. Ruth is ill with pneumonia. The prison conditions are unspeakable. I have sent money for medicine, though I do not know if it will reach her. Then, in August 1879, an entry that made Sarah close her eyes. August 12th, 1879. Ruth Freeman died yesterday in the Delaware Women's Penitentiary. She was 23 years old. The official cause of death is listed as pneumonia, but I know the truth. She died because she dared to help others, because she refused to accept that families should remain broken, because she believed in something larger than her own safety. I commissioned our photograph so that there would be proof she existed, that our friendship was real, that she was more than a name in a prison ledger. I will continue her work. I will not let her death be meaningless. The reading room was absolutely silent. Dorothy spoke first, her voice unsteady. There's more. Clara kept working. She documented it all. She pushed forward a bundle of letters. They were correspondence between Clara and the other women in the network, carefully worded but unmistakable in their purpose. For 3 more years, until 1882, Clara continued helping separated families reunite, using the systems and contacts Ruth had established. Why did she stop in 1882? Marcus asked. Sarah found the answer in a final journal entry. March 1882. The work has become too dangerous. 3 houses in Philadelphia were raided last month, and 2 women were arrested. Mother is ill, and Father has begged me to cease these activities. I have agreed, though it tears my heart to abandon what Ruth died for. I keep her necklace locked away now, too dangerous to wear. Perhaps someday the world will be ready to know what we did. Perhaps someday someone will understand. Marcus returned to his office at the Smithsonian with copies of everything Sarah had found. Now that they knew what to look for, the investigation moved faster. The coded language Clara had mentioned in her journals, he had seen similar references in other documents related to post-war reunification efforts. He pulled out files from a research project he had worked on 5 years earlier, studying the transition from the Underground Railroad to post-abolition mutual aid societies. Several historians had noted mysterious networks operating in the 1870s and early 1880s, helping formerly enslaved people locate family members, but concrete evidence had been scarce. Now, with Clara's journals as a guide, Marcus began connecting the dots. The compass rose symbol appeared in 3 other artifacts in the Smithsonian's collection. A brass button found in a Philadelphia boarding house, a carved wooden pendant discovered in a Baltimore church, and a small pewter pin included in an estate donation from Delaware. Each one had been cataloged separately, their significance unrecognized. Marcus laid them out on his desk, photographing each one. The symbols were identical, 7 stars arranged in a specific pattern around a central compass rose. Not just similar, identical. He cross-referenced the locations where each artifact had been found with Clara's journal entries. Every single one corresponded to an address or location Clara had mentioned as part of the network. They had a system, Marcus said aloud, though he was alone in his office. A way to identify safe houses and trusted contacts. The symbol was the key. He pulled up census records, death certificates, and property records for the addresses Clara had noted. A pattern emerged. The houses were owned or operated by women, black women and white women, sometimes working together, sometimes separately, who ran boarding houses, seamstress shops, laundries, or other businesses that allowed them to host travelers without arousing suspicion. The network had been larger and more organized than anyone had previously understood. Marcus drafted an email to Sarah. I've found at least 12 other locations connected to Clara and Ruth's network. This wasn't just 2 women working alone. It was a coordinated system operating across at least 4 states. We need to document this properly. This is a major discovery. Sarah's response came within minutes. I found something else, a letter from Clara to a cousin written in 1925. She's talking about the photograph. I'm sending you a scan now. Marcus opened the attachment. The letter was written in an elderly hand, shaky but still legible. Dear Margaret, you asked about the photograph on my desk, the one of Ruth and myself. It was taken long ago in a time when such friendships were not easily understood or accepted. Ruth was the bravest person I ever knew. She gave her life so that others might find their loved ones again. The necklace she wore in that photograph, the one I kept hidden for so many years, it represented a promise we made, that we would help put families back together, no matter the cost. I failed her in the end. I could not save her from prison, could not prevent her death, could not even attend her burial, but I kept our promise for as long as I could. The photograph is all I have left of her now, of the work we did together, of the love we shared. Not romantic love, but something deeper, a bond forged in purpose and sacrifice. When I am gone, I want you to know that Ruth Freeman mattered, that she was extraordinary, and that she should be remembered." Marcus sat back in his chair, overwhelmed. This wasn't just a historical discovery. It was a resurrection of two women whose courage had been buried by time and circumstance. Sarah knew that finding more information about Ruth would be difficult. Black women in the 1870s left fewer records than white women, and those records were often lost, destroyed, or simply never created in the first place. But she refused to let Ruth remain a ghost in Clara's story. She started with the census records Marcus had already found, but this time she went deeper, looking at the entire household Ruth had lived in. The 1880 census showed no Ruth Freeman. She was already dead by then. But the 1870 census listed her at age 14, living on Lombard Street with her mother, Grace Freeman, who worked as a laundress, and two younger siblings. Sarah searched for Grace Freeman in church records, death certificates, and tax documents. She found a burial record from 1885 in the records of Mother Bethel AME Church, one of Philadelphia's oldest black congregations. Grace Freeman had been buried in the church's cemetery, and the record noted she was survived by two children, Thomas Freeman and Alice Freeman. Ruth had died before her mother with no burial record Sarah could find. Prisoners who died in custody were often buried in unmarked graves, their deaths barely documented. But the church connection gave Sarah a new avenue. She contacted the current archivist at Mother Bethel, explaining what she was researching. The archivist, a woman named Linda, was immediately interested. "We have some records from that era," Linda said over the phone, "and there's an oral history project we did in the 1990s, interviewing the oldest members about their family histories. Let me search our database." 2 hours later, Linda called back. "I found something. An interview from 1994 with a woman named Evelyn Washington, who was 93 at the time. She talked about her grandmother, Alice Freeman, who had a sister named Ruth, who did good work helping folks find their people after slavery times, and who died young in prison for it. She said her grandmother kept a small box of Ruth's things, letters, a piece of jewelry, a photograph." Sarah's heart leaped. "Is Evelyn Washington still alive?" "She passed in 1998, but I can reach out to her family. They might still have those items." 3 days later, Sarah sat in a sunny living room in West Philadelphia, across from Evelyn Washington's granddaughter, Patricia, who held a small wooden box in her lap. "Great Aunt Ruth is kind of a family legend," Patricia said, opening the box carefully. "My grandmother said she was the bravest woman in the family, that she sacrificed everything to help other people. We didn't know much about the details, just that she'd been in prison and died there." Inside the box were letters, Ruth's letters to her mother and siblings, written from prison. Sarah's hands shook as she read them. "Mama, please do not worry for me. I am well, as can be expected. The work we did was right and just, and I do not regret it, though I miss you and Thomas and Alice terribly. Tell Clara, if you see her, that I am grateful for her friendship, and that she must not blame herself for what has happened. This was always the risk we knew we took." There were 5 more letters, each one growing shorter and weaker, the handwriting deteriorating. The last one, dated July 1879, was only a few lines. "Mama, I am very tired. Please know I love you. Take care of Thomas and Alice. Tell them their sister tried to do good in the world." Patricia wiped her eyes. "We should have known more about her. She deserves to be remembered properly." At the bottom of the box was the photograph. Not the one taken by Morrison, but another one, smaller and more worn. It showed Ruth alone, younger, perhaps 16 or 17, standing in front of Mother Bethel Church in a simple, dark dress. On the back, in faded ink, "Ruth Freeman, 1872. And beneath that, wrapped in cloth, was a necklace, a silver chain with a compass rose pendant, 7 stars arranged in a perfect circle around it. "She sent this home from prison," Patricia said softly. "She told her mother to keep it safe, that it meant something important. We've kept it in the family ever since, but we never knew exactly what it meant." Sarah carefully photographed the necklace, the letters, and the additional photograph. "It meant she was part of something bigger than herself," she explained. "It meant she was helping to heal the wounds of slavery, one family at a time." The exhibition opened on a cold morning in February, 2 years after Sarah had first noticed the photograph in the archive. The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture had dedicated an entire gallery to the story of Clara Hodgson and Ruth Freeman, and the post-war reunification network they had been part of. The centerpiece was the Morrison photograph, enlarged and beautifully displayed with Clara's necklace, loaned by the Quaker Library, and Ruth's necklace, loaned by Patricia Washington, and her family mounted on either side. Visitors could see the identical symbols, understand their meaning, and read the story of 2 women who had risked everything for justice. Marcus and Sarah stood together at the opening, watching visitors move through the space. The exhibition included Clara's journals, Ruth's letters, the Morrison photographers' notes, and artifacts from a dozen other reunion houses they had identified across 4 states. Interactive displays explained how the network had operated, what risks the women had faced, and how many families they had helped reunite. But it was the personal stories that drew the longest crowds. Excerpts from Clara's journals were displayed alongside Ruth's letters from prison. Photographs of other network members, some whose names they had discovered, others still anonymous, lined the walls. And at the end of the gallery, visitors could read the letter Clara had written to her cousin in 1925, her final testimony to Ruth's courage. Patricia Washington attended the opening with her extended family, including several who had traveled from other states. "This is the first time our whole family has really understood what Ruth did," she told Sarah. "We knew she was important to us, but seeing it like this, understanding the scope of it, it's overwhelming." One visitor, an elderly black woman, stood in front of the photograph for nearly 20 minutes, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she approached Marcus. "My great-grandfather was reunited with his mother in 1879, she said. "He was sold away from her when he was 8 years old during slavery. After the war, he searched for 15 years. Someone, he never knew who, helped him find her in Tennessee. They had 10 more years together before she died. He always said it was the greatest gift of his life, those 10 years. She looked back at the photograph. It could have been these women who helped him, or others like them. Either way, I owe them everything. As the day went on, more stories emerged. Descendants of reunited families, genealogists who had traced family trees back to the 1870s and found mysterious gaps filled in by unexplained reunions, historians who had found references to the network but never understood its full scope. Clara and Ruth had not worked alone, but without the photograph, without Clara's insistence on documenting their friendship, without the photographer who kept the negatives safe, without the donations to archives and the determination of 2 researchers who recognized the significance of a small silver symbol, their story would have remained hidden forever. That evening, after the exhibition closed, Sarah and Marcus stood alone in the gallery looking at the photograph one last time before heading home. "Do you think they knew?" Sarah asked. "When they stood for this photograph, do you think they understood that someday more than a century later people would know their names and honor what they did?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't think they cared about being remembered. They cared about the work, about the families they helped reunite, about doing what was right even when it cost them everything." He gestured to the necklace, its silver gleaming under the gallery lights. "But I'm glad we found them anyway. I'm glad their story survived. Because Clara was right. Ruth Freeman mattered. She was extraordinary. And now finally she's remembered." The compass rose, symbol gleamed in the light, its 7 stars arranged in perfect symmetry, a testament to a network of women who had operated in shadows and silence, who had given everything for justice and who had left behind just enough evidence, a photograph, a necklace, a few letters and journals, for their story to finally be told. It had started with 2 young women posing for a photograph, wanting to preserve something precious in a dangerous time. And now, more than 140 years later, that photograph had revealed a hidden chapter of American history, brought 2 forgotten heroines back to life, and reminded everyone who saw it that courage often comes in quiet forms, that friendship can transcend the boundaries society tries to impose, and that sometimes the most powerful acts of resistance are the ones that history almost forgets. But not this time. This time, Clara and Ruth's story would be told, would be taught, would be remembered, and that small silver necklace with its compass rose and 7 stars would forever symbolize the work they did, the sacrifice they made, and the love that bound them together across barriers of race, class, and time itself. A love that was not romantic, but perhaps even deeper. The love of 2 people united in purpose, committed to justice and willing to risk everything so that others might have what slavery had stolen from them, the chance to be whole again, the chance to come home.